A culture that prizes and values and even insists upon the addition of every single voice is one that I think is enriched by each voice and not just by those who are inclined to come forward immediately.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And it is 2019.
It is.
We took a couple weeks off for
Yes.
holidays and renewal and whatnot. But we are back.
We are back.
So this is kind of exciting news. Our Facebook group is at 47 members. So we are just 3 shy of it being 50.
It does seem like a milestone.
It does. It does. So here's my thought. The 50th person who joins, we will mail you a So Here's My Story whiskey glass.
Yes.
And if you are referred by someone, so if one of our current listeners and Facebook members lures you into the group, we will also send them a whiskey glass.
Right. So when you join, say, hey, I was referred by so-and-so. And these are limited edition whiskey glasses. They are not available at retail outlets.
Not yet.
Not yet.
It's just a matter of time. But,
correct.
All right. So hop on into the Facebook group. If you're trying to find that, you can either get there from our Facebook page, which is So Here's My Story, or you can go actually to our website, sohere'smystory.com, and there's a button that takes you straight to the Facebook group. So hope to see you there.
All right. So Jody has a story.
I do.
And so it is then incumbent upon me to give you the coming attractions of this story. And I will tell you, the best I can tell you is this. Jody's story revolves around karaoke, which is something that she relishes and I personally dread. But I love where the conversation takes us as far as how that translates, and this is going to be a surprise to you, how that translates into business, company culture, and what really makes magic.
So here's my story. On New Year's Eve,
Yes.
the day before New Year's Eve, we went to this karaoke party in town, my husband and I. And as I think we've mentioned here, I sing in a band, so singing is fun for me. I've always been part, in a family that sings, and so singing is just very natural and fun for me. So going to a karaoke party is stress-free and exciting, right?
Right. Sure.
Whereas my husband would probably rather have his toenails pulled off than you've met Paul.
Yes.
Does anything about him scream karaoke?
He is a kindred spirit to me in many ways, this being one of them.
Yes. So I actually wasn't sure if he was going to go with me. And throughout the whole holiday season, I even kept saying, well, if we end up going to that thing or if you go with me. And he was like, do you not want me to go? And I'm like, no, I just know that you don't want to go. And he's like, no, it's fine. It's fine. And the reason that I was dragging my feet a little bit for him in his stead is that, this friend of mine who hosts these, he calls it the Cougar Lounge, and he has this whole setup at his place.
That's a whole nother story.
I know. But it's great. They have the whole setup with lights and it's just a lot of fun. But rule number 1, there are 7 rules, and no one can remember what 4, 5, and 6 are. But the first rule is everybody has to sing.
Oh,
so
okay.
Right. So this was slight trepidation I had for Paul because I knew he would have to sing.
You have to sing solo, or can you go up in a group of 5 people?
You can go up and you just have to go up.
Okay.
So you can do it with 2 people. You do whatever. So here's what's interesting. That rule, and this is why I wanted to bring it up as a story. That rule is not to put people on the spot. It's not to make people uncomfortable, which is kind of how I was going into it for Paul. I was worried for him that he was going to feel on pressure to do it. But that's not the point. The point is because if you don't have a rule like that, then it becomes like a Ringer Circus. The people who are only the people who love singing, who feel confident about singing, who especially because there are a few people who come who have extremely good voices. And so it would just be this big performance by people who feel really confident for the most part.
Right. Well,
because of rule number 1, everybody has to sing. And I was sitting there thinking about the very special kind of magic that creates, because you make it safe and important for everybody to participate. And then it becomes it's like a magic sauce to the evening, because this night, by the end of the night, Paul was laughing hysterically. He was actually bummed that the song what I picked for us to do was for him to just do the turn around. And then I would go every now and then. And all he would have to do was the turn around. And when we were leaving at the end of the night, he goes, well, next time we come, I'm just going to do them by myself.
Okay.
Which speaks a lot to the because people even do it almost sort of performance arty. One guy does that song Creep, but he does it in the voice of the really awful guy from Silence of the Lambs.
Oh,
like what?
Right, Hannibal Lecter.
No. The other guy. Anyway, I'm doing the terrible job of telling the story, but he sings the song Creep, and then he's like, "Do you wear a size 14?" So anyway, the point is, the reason, and I'm sure some of our listeners are like, "What on earth does this have to do with business?" But it got me to thinking about culture and what kind of culture you create. And I think it makes a lot of sense that you obviously you want to reward and highlight people who are doing a really good job where talent, and you elevate talent. But if you're just focusing on the people who are naturally good at things and who are naturally confident and who naturally put their foot naturally raise their hand and step forward for things, you're missing this whole other layer of energy and talent and fun and excitement that wouldn't show up otherwise. So to me, that rule number one was a way that pulls out all this extra energy that would have otherwise just sort of been left behind in the space if it wasn't there. And so that's where I am.
Well, okay, so I have a number of thoughts on that as somebody who falls far on the opposite end of the spectrum than you do about the excitement of karaoke.
Sure.
To me, that's a contradiction in terms. And so on the one hand, I completely see what you're saying, because a culture that prizes and values and even insists upon the addition of every single voice is one that I think is enriched by each voice and not just by those who are inclined to come forward immediately. So I think that I can really see that as a huge boon to a culture and something to build a culture around. Where I question it is that it's not saying in that karaoke issue, he's not saying you have to contribute to the party in some way, so if your voice, quote unquote, is cooking or your voice is something else, it's saying, no, this is the narrow spectrum of contribution that we're looking for, and you must contribute there.
I hear you. That's why I wanted to bring it up, because it's not like I think you should force everyone to participate in ways that they don't feel comfortable. However, it is a narrow spectrum, but it's wider than it sounds. Like you can do interpretive dance if you want. You don't have to necessarily. You could do spoken word. You could do it however you want to do it, and people really do take a wide swath within that to make it their own. And that's what I think is interesting is by creating the constraint of you have to go up there and do something, and then people find a way to make it their own so that they feel comfortable doing it. Because what's interesting to me, no one ever is up there like begrudgingly trudging their way through a song just to check the box. Like they find a way, they may be shrieking with terror on the inside for all I know, but they find a way to make it their own. And it's an interesting, it's an interesting stretch. It reminds me a little bit, sort of this balancing act. I think we've even talked about this before. Like when I facilitate with groups, there are plenty of people in the room who will speak up every thought they have. And when I'm sitting at the table, I'm one of those people. I have to sort of check myself so that I'm not always talking, always contributing a thought. And so because I'm I process things in a way that I instantly want to chatter about it. Other people, interestingly, like my husband and other people who'll be sitting there at the table, are more processors. They need a minute to like think things through, gather their thoughts, and then they're happy to chime in. But that's why I always create that space where, I'll say like, here's a question, take like 30 seconds to a minute, jot down a couple ideas, and then I'm going to go around the table and make sure I hear from all of you. And so everybody contributes something, and you end up hearing things that you wouldn't have heard otherwise. So I think that's the part that fascinates me about this is we got to see, there's about half the people who went up at that party that I guarantee you would not have gone up if not for rule number one. And they were amazing. Like it added such a layer of interestingness to the party.
See, I can see that. My question then is though, what about the people who were not at the party because of rule number one?
That's a great question.
So you've got
like Paul. I wasn't sure Paul was going to come.
Correct.
Right.
So I believe rule number one enriches the experience of everybody at the party and brings out perhaps hidden facets of those who choose to go to the party.
Mm-hmm.
But the presence of rule number one also comes with the cost of keeping out people who otherwise would have come to the party but not participated in that activity. And so my point is, when you look at company culture, I think that's fine as long as you've evaluated even that unintended consequence by saying, you know what, we think we're stronger, getting the most out of the people who would come to the party, and we are willing to pay the price of not hearing from those people who would be kept away by rule number one.
Well, and but I think that's okay. I mean, we've talked about this before, that is one of the signs of a really well-defined culture and values, is when some people can clearly say, not that. That's not for me. I'm not interested in that kind of culture. That's not the kind of soil that I want to grow in or would grow in. So I think I'm okay with that. But it's a great point that you can weed people out that maybe you don't want weeded out. Inadvertently, you could exclude people.
Right. So it depends. So the people who threw that party decided that karaoke was going to be that bright line, where they are willing to pay the price of losing the attendance of those people who will not participate in karaoke, because their party, and the metaphor is for company culture, their company is defined by karaoke. But it may be the wrong thing if they just said, look, we make the best whiskey sour in the world. And everybody who comes, I don't care whether you have 12 or whether you have one, but everybody must finish at least one. All right. Well, then in that case, what they've elevated to the primary characteristic of their culture is you have to drink. So you're going to exclude people who just don't want to drink. Right. For whatever reason, whether they're pregnant or whether they're in AA or recovery, or whether they just choose not to. So I think it's fine. Like you, I think it's perfectly fine to adopt that rule. I think the tricky part is figuring out which characteristic, which issue you're going to draw that bright line on and say, look, if you're not on one side of the line, then we're okay not having you at all. Right.
There is another level to it, because what got me thinking about this that night, because, it was New Year's Eve and I was at a karaoke party, and yes, I was sitting here thinking about how to make a great episode. But I think, because what's interesting is I've been to this party that they host a few times a year, twice now. And it always, now I guess 2 is not exactly a vast sample set, but both times I've been there, and pictures I've seen some other times, it somehow, how sometimes you're at a party and it's a perfectly good time, but it's just kind of it's just a perfectly good time. So it's sort of like, you go to a movie and it's, you don't feel like you lost 3 hours of your life, but you never weren't aware you were watching a movie the whole time.
Right, absolutely.
Versus, when I went to see Avatar and, you get up and you're like, how was that 3 hours? Like, I was lost in another world. This party, some parties just get elevated to that kind of lost in another world kind of vibe. And there's a magic to it.
Yes. This
space always somehow seems to find its way to that magic. And I think part of it's rule number one. I think there's a couple other parts of these 7 rules that contributes to it. So I think maybe, and I'm bringing it up because maybe it's part of, you can't just have rule number one. You have to have these other rules. Like, if you're going to talk or be on your phone, you have to go into the kitchen, into the other room. If you're in that space, you have to be giving your full attention to the person singing.
Makes sense.
And it does, but it's a subtle thing that without being said, if you're nervous and you're up there and you look out and everyone's staring at their phones, you're going to be more nervous versus if everyone's like paying attention and focused. Obviously, no mocking people, other than like fun mockery. And it's because it becomes so positive and everyone, it's just got this like great vibe to it. So I think there's something about, and I will say that my one concern about using this as a story is it's absolutely one of those things that probably doesn't convey well in story, sort of like you had to be there to experience that kind of thing. But there is something that happens in a magic vibe in a culture when you can light people up in a way that like it's like a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of vibe. And so I think that's what fascinates me is like, what's the mix of things you need in your culture that gets things out of people that wouldn't have otherwise shown up?
I think, and I've thought about this a lot and over the weekend, but for a different reason. And that is, I think there has to be a shared experience which incorporates a sense of vulnerability for everybody, regardless of what that is. And here's why. So in my public speaking class, the best thing that I do and the way that I know I'm successful is if I get feedback from the students by the end of the semester that talk about how their family, or they don't use the word culture, but it's basically I create a culture or an environment in that class where they feel at ease and they feel like they're family and they're part of something and they have a shared experience. And
they're inside jokes.
Yeah, they're inside jokes. And so they'll tell me stories like they'll be out on campus. They'll be at, they'll be at a bar, or they'll be, just any place at the student union, and they'll look across and they'll yell, "Public speaking, your Wagenheim's class," or whatever it is. And they say that it happens all the time. And it's just weird because they don't do that for chemistry and they don't do that for anything else. But and this was brought home to me because I asked my class at the end of the semester, the last thing I asked them to do while in class is to compose an email to me that I will then kind of take excerpts from and send it to the incoming class, what I wish I had known.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And so what I wish I had known on the first day of class. And so they'll send me an email. So I was going through because this semester starts at the end of this month. And I send an email out to the incoming people for my class because we get that list. Just because I know there's a lot of angst. Most of them are taking it to fulfill a requirement. There's a lot of angst.
And people love public speaking about as much as they love forced karaoke.
Yes. So I was looking over the excerpts that I was going to send the incoming students, and the vast majority of them spoke about how it was family and about how in their last speech they could do things and feel more at ease because these weren't just strangers. These were, and I think that it goes back to the karaoke because first of all, I do have that same rule. You're in public speaking. You are going to get up and speak in public. Yeah. You're going to have to do that. Most of them are uneasy. Some are stars, but most of them are uneasy. And it's a relentlessly supportive environment.
Yep.
You can't just, I deliberately don't ask the class, "Hey, what'd you think about that?" Well, she could have cut down on her filler words, which I know a lot of public speaking professors do. We don't do that. So it's positive. You laugh together. You're in the same boat. And I think that does build a culture.
It does. And then that's the thing. I think what's interesting / tricky about this is if you're not careful, it can sound a little bit like sort of participation trophy culture, like, oh, just build people up. Don't tell them what's wrong. But that's, I think any approach is bad if it's the only tool you have in the tool set. I think there is something magical about unlocking something in people that they are hesitant to open up with. So like with public speaking or karaoke, what it takes, this relentlessly supportive, a tiny bit forced, but in a relentlessly supportive environment is what the environment that you need to coax something out of people that you might not otherwise get out of them. That's the magic piece. There are lots of other times where that's not what the focus is or the primary need is, but there is something really fascinating to me about what hidden treasures might show up when you try this sort of like weird chemistry mix of kind of forcing people into something in a relentlessly supportive environment.
Yeah, and it depends what the metric is. Now, I do offer criticism because I'm the professor and I'm supposed to do that, but I do it in a different form. I do it in private and in emails and all that stuff. But I think that in this respect. I think you can choose. You can be a performer or a critic, but you can't be both. And
wait, say that again.
You can be a performer or a critic, but you can't be both.
In the same moment, do you mean? Or what?
Yeah, in the same moment, for this. So I want them, they're all performers. I want them to go in and I want them to speak, and I don't want them to be critics. And I hear that's from heroic public speaking, be a performer, not a critic. But also in your karaoke example, you don't really care whether the people improve or evolve as karaoke singers. Mm-hmm. But what you might care about is that they feel at ease enough and have enough faith in the group that they could then share their own stories, or they could talk more about what things that matter to them and have real conversations, as opposed to, so what are your resolutions for 2019?
Well, that's the funny thing. There's a woman that I met at the last one, and we just saw each other there. And then there is a Facebook group where sort of all these, and honest to goodness, I feel like she's my best friend. Yeah. And I only met her that one time. And there was something very boundary breaking down about doing something that's a little bit, and you know what's funny? I love singing. I'm not very usually nervous about it, but even I, like when I go up, I get a little bit, I could feel my voice doing that little bit of like not stress cracking, but like I was a little bit wobbly when I was starting out because I was doing songs that I don't normally do, so I'm sure it's even, my poor husband was probably like, but the fact that he walked out of there that night, and as we were waiting for our lift, it wasn't even like, well, if I ever come back, he goes, next time I'm going to do my own song. And I thought, wow, that is, it's an overused word, but that is one heck of a transformation from like, I don't even know if I want to go, to next time I'm just going to do my own song. And he said it almost like I had ruined it for him. It's really funny. He's like, next time I'm just going to do my own song. I'm like, hats off.
Well, because I think that what's really interesting is if you identify the thing, the biggest fear involved. And the biggest fear involved, whether it's public speaking or karaoke, the biggest fear is I'm going to look stupid. Other people are going to laugh at me. I'm going to be harshly judged. I'm going to be made fun of. You never lose that from kindergarten or whatever. You just have that. And so if you are in that environment, you realize, oh, that's not true. So the obstacles are eliminated. That's where I think the magic comes from.
There is, but yes. And you just reminded me of one other thing that's so important about it is, and this is like, I want to say this just right, and I'm probably not going to, but there is something magical because people go up. Part of the reason I love rule number 1 is that people who aren't great at singing go up and they do look silly or like, but not in a, like, I don't even know the right words because they all sound judgmental. Like they do look goofy or they're like making I'm making air quotes, like fools of themselves. And it's brilliant to watch somebody just not be concerned about looking perfect. There is something magical about that because it makes it okay to not. That's the part I was getting at in the beginning was if you don't have rule number 1 and only people who go up who like knock it out of the ballpark, something is lost in the whole thing because unless you're going to be air quote perfect, it's not okay. And there's just something so amazing about having a space where people publicly can be super, super imperfect, even like close to failure at like level of something, and it be completely fine. Like the world doesn't stop spinning if you have a heck of a good time singing a song completely off key.
Right.
It's just fun.
And so that's where I think you really move into the business world. If you create something where it's okay to fail or okay to not be perfect, and what that means, even in the conference room, is that somebody can speak up and say, hey, this isn't a fully formed idea, but I just think that there's something to this. And you don't have people at the boardroom going, well, how's that going to work, Sharon? Why is that? That's never going to happen. And here are all the obstacles. And that's a stupid idea. And,
exactly.
But no, you've got somebody who might have the germ of something that could be incredible. And they feel okay. They feel completely at ease contributing that because it's okay not to be perfect. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.